Maya stood there for a heartbeat too long, unsure if she should apologize again or turn around and leave. But something in the man's expression kept her rooted in place. The faint curve of his lips was neither cold nor kind. It was unreadable, and that made her pulse race faster. Her son Liam looked up at her, tugging lightly at her hand, whispering, "If they could sit down already," his small voice pulling her out of her frozen state. She nodded quickly and guided him to the chair opposite the man, who simply gestured silently for them to sit. There was something about his presence that filled the air with quiet authority, the kind that could make a crowded room still itself without a single word, and yet he didn't say much. His eyes lingered on her face as if trying to remember something that should not be forgotten, but couldn't quite take shape in the dim light. She tried to meet his gaze, but there was a strange flicker in it, something between recognition and disbelief that made her heart twist in a way she couldn't explain. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but the words refused to come out. The waiter appeared like a shadow and placed 2 menus before them. The CEO never looked away from Maya, even as he ordered for the table in a calm tone that seemed too deliberate, like someone trying to control what was slipping beneath the surface. She could feel Liam shifting beside her. Restless, curious, his little fingers tracing circles on the edge of the menu. She whispered for him to sit still, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the restaurant. The man finally spoke again, his voice soft yet heavy, like the kind of voice that carried secrets you weren't supposed to hear. He said that he didn't mind her bringing her son, and that it was actually nice to see someone honest enough not to hide their life behind a perfect picture. She smiled weakly, unsure if that was a compliment or something else entirely. There was warmth in his words, but there was also an edge that made her uneasy, like the sound of glass underfoot that could shatter at any moment. As the waiter left, the man leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the table, his eyes still locked on her. He asked how old Liam was, and when Maya told him 6. The man nodded thoughtfully, his gaze drifting to the boy's face for a moment too long. It wasn't a normal look. It was as if he was comparing Liam to something or someone. His brows furrowed slightly, then smoothed out again. He said, "Your son is very polite," and that simple line should have sounded ordinary, but it carried something behind it, something that made Maya's chest tighten. She asked him about his work, trying to steer the conversation somewhere safer, but he only gave short answers, his attention returning again and again to her son, who now played quietly with the edge of a napkin, as if unaware that something deeper was unfolding across the table. Maya felt the air shift around, them growing thicker, heavier, like a storm creeping closer with every passing second. She tried to remember how she ended up here in the first place. Her friend Sarah had set her up, insisting that the man was kind, intelligent, and exactly the sort of person she deserved after all the heartbreak she had endured. Sarah hadn't mentioned he was a CEO. She hadn't mentioned the sharpness of his gaze or the way he seemed to notice things no one else did. Maya had agreed because she was tired, of feeling alone because she wanted to believe that maybe someone could see her beyond the title of single mother. But now, sitting across from this man, she wasn't sure if she had made a mistake. His every movement was precise, his words measured, his interest genuine yet strange. She could not decide if he was fascinated by her or by something he had already guessed, and every time he smiled, it felt like he was waiting for her to confirm a truth she didn't know existed. Liam looked up from his napkin and asked the man an innocent question about his watch, saying it looked shiny. The CEO chuckled softly, his first real laugh of the evening. It was deep, warm, even kind, but it didn't reach his eyes. He told Liam it was a gift from someone very important a long time ago, and that he kept it because it reminded him of something he shouldn't forget. He then turned his wrist slightly, and the light glinted across the watch face. For a split second, Maya thought she saw an engraving there, 3 letters carved in delicate script, the same initials she had once seen on an old photograph her late husband had kept locked away in a drawer before he died. But that couldn't be possible. Her breath caught as she tried to look closer, yet the man quickly shifted his hand, breaking her line of sight. The food arrived, breaking the uneasy silence, and for a few minutes, everything felt almost normal. They talked about ordinary things, work, school, the weather. But even in those small exchanges, there was something deliberate about his tone, like he was guiding the conversation toward a place only he knew existed. Maya found herself answering questions she didn't remember him asking about: where she grew up, what kind of man Liam's father had been, how long ago he had passed away. When she realized what she was saying, it was too late. Her words hung in the air, fragile and exposed. The CEO nodded slowly, absorbing every detail with an intensity that frightened her slightly. Then he said, quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss," but his voice cracked on the last word, and she could tell it wasn't sympathy that made it tremble. It was recognition and fear. Maya wanted to leave. She wanted to take Liam and walk out into the cool night and forget this evening ever happened. But something inside her told her to stay, to wait just a little longer, because there was a reason this man reacted the way he did, and she needed to know why. He leaned forward slightly. Now his eyes softer yet distant, as if caught between two worlds. He asked about Liam's father again. What he did, where he was from, his questions careful. His voice a low whisper that only she could hear. The rest of the restaurant seemed to fade away until it was just the three of them, Maya, Liam, and the man whose gaze seemed to pull her into a memory that wasn't hers. When the waiter returned with dessert, the CEO waved him away without looking up. He reached into his jacket and placed something on the table. Between them it was a silver pen. Simple, elegant, worn at the edges. Maya stared at it, recognizing it instantly. She had seen that exact pen years ago, clutched in her husband's hand, the night he wrote the last note she ever found before he died. The note that had never made sense to her. She felt the blood drain from her face as she looked from the pen to the man across from her. He didn't speak, but his expression told her he already knew. She was beginning to understand, too. But her thoughts refused to form into words. Liam looked between them, confused, his small voice breaking the heavy silence when he asked, "Mommy, why does he have Daddy's pen?" The sound of the child's question seemed to slice through the quiet like a blade. The CEO froze, his knuckles white against the table. Maya stared at him, waiting for an explanation, but his lips parted without a sound. He reached out as if to touch the pen, then stopped as though afraid of what that gesture might reveal. The air around them shifted again, heavy with something unspoken, the kind of silence that comes before a truth too big to hide. He finally met her gaze. His eyes filled with something dark and familiar, a shadow she had seen only once before. And just as she was about to ask what was going on, he leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper, and said something that made her world stop. Cold Maya felt the air leave her lungs as the man's words reached her ears. Though they were barely more than a whisper, she heard them as clearly as if they had been carved into the space between them. He said that her husband was not supposed to die, that he had been there the night everything happened, that he had tried to stop it, but failed, and that the note her husband left was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. She stared at him, unable to speak, unable to understand what he meant. Her heart beating faster with every word. His eyes were clouded with something she could not name, guilt maybe, or grief, or both. His fingers hovered near the pen, trembling slightly before pulling back as if the object itself burned to the touch. Liam looked between them, wide-eyed, not understanding the weight of what had just been said. The man leaned closer, his voice low, his breath unsteady, as he told her that years ago he had known her husband. They had worked together on something secret, something dangerous, something that had gone wrong. And that night when her husband was found, it hadn't been an accident. It hadn't even been despair. He said there were people who wanted the truth buried forever, and that her husband had paid the price for knowing too much. Maya's mind reeled. Her vision blurred, her throat tightening as if the air itself was too thick to breathe. She shook her head, saying no again and again, her voice barely a whisper, but the man didn't stop. He said her husband had trusted him with something before he died, something meant to reach her. But it never did because he was too afraid to bring it until now. He reached into his coat again and this time pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, creased from being hidden too long. Maya hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against his for a fleeting moment that made her skin crawl. The envelope had her name written in the same handwriting she remembered from the note, the one she had kept all these years, never knowing what it truly meant. Her hands shook as she opened it. Slowly inside was a photograph and a small piece of paper. The photograph showed her husband standing beside the same man now sitting across from her. both of them younger, smiling. But behind them, in the blurred background, there was a shadow of another figure. Someone. She didn't recognize the piece.